Welcome to episode 159. And today I'd like to talk about a question that sounds simple on the surface, but it's actually one that a lot of business owners are quietly trying to work out as they grow. And that is, what is HR? And therefore, what does an HR company actually do? Because for many business owners, HR is one of those things that just sits in the background until suddenly it doesn't. In the early stages of a business, you can often manage things informally. You know your people well, you're close to what's happening on a day-to-day basis. Any issues can be sorted out fairly quickly with a conversation. You probably have a contract template somewhere, a few policies in a folder, and a general sense that, we'll just deal with things as they come up. And it works for a while. But then the business grows, you have more employees, more moving parts, more complexity, and situations are no longer as easy to handle on that instinct and gut feel alone. And maybe you're hiring more often, you're dealing with managers who are now responsible for leading people, you're navigating performance issues, trying to keep up with all the fair work obligations, or realizing what used to feel manageable now is a little bit messy or inconsistent, or you're worried about the risk. And that's usually the point where business owners start asking whether they need HR support and what they're actually going to get if they engage a HR company. So, in this episode, I want to unpack that in a practical way and talk about what an HR company actually does, why so many growing businesses choose outsourced HR support instead of building that internal HR capability straight away, what could go wrong when there's no real HR structure in place, and how the right support can make a genuine difference to the growth of your business, the culture, and your confidence. Because good HR is not just about documents and compliance, although those things are really important, they absolutely matter. It really, when it actually gives a lot of value, it's about helping the business build the foundations that is needed to be able to grow well, lead well, and avoid being derailed by preventable issues. So let's start with the first part. When people hear the phrase HR company, they often think of policies, contracts, maybe someone stepping in when there's a problem. And yeah, that can be part of it, but the reality is a lot broader than that. At its core, HR company helps a business manage its people in a way that's compliant, practical, and aligned to where the business is trying to get to. So that can include setting up solid employment contracts, policies, basic people processes, but it can also include helping with the day-to-day people stuff like performance concerns, employee behaviour, leave questions, workplace conflict, grievances, investigations, restructures, and all those situations that a lot of business owners never really expected would take up so much time and energy. And a good HR company could also help with recruitment. You're not just filling the vacancy, but thinking about what is the role? What does success look like in the role? How do we attract the right people? How do we assess them properly? How do we make sure that we're not just hiring based on urgency or our gut feel? And once someone joins, HR support can help make onboarding more intentional so the new team members settle in well, understand expectations, and become productive quickly. And then there's performance and development, which is where I think great HR starts to become really valuable because it's the one thing to bring people into a business, but it's another thing entirely to actually help them to grow and develop and thrive. So that means creating clear expectations, giving managers support to have better conversations, building feedback habits, and making sure that people know where they stand. And sometimes it's also helping our people managers really understand this human side of the business, which is often the part they're least prepared for. And beyond all of that, good HR support is strategic. So it helps you to think ahead, ask questions like, do we have the right structure? Are our managers capable and supported? Are we creating consistency across teams? What kind of culture do we want to build? And are we setting ourselves up for sustainable growth rather than just reacting to whatever is happening this week? And that's why a good HR company is not just there to solve problems, it should be helping you to prevent them and create stronger foundations so that your business is easier to lead and manage. Now, one of the things that naturally flows from this is why would a business outsource HR instead of hiring internally? And this is an important point because sometimes a business owner really struggles to have HR in their business because they look at the cost of bringing in a full-time HR manager and it feels like a lot of money. And for a lot of small and medium businesses, it is a lot of money to bring in an internal HR person that doesn't have that direct revenue impact. But the issue is not that you don't need any HR support. It's just that you need more than you currently have. And that's often not enough to justify a full-time internal hire. Because there is a really big gap between doing everything yourself and then employing a senior HR person. And so that's where the outsourced or fractional HR can be really incredibly effective. When you work with an external HR company, you're buying access to that expertise, guidance, structure, and support in a way that can scale with your business. You might not need any help getting contracts or policies sorted. You may need help coaching managers through tricky conversations. You might want someone who can look across the business, identify risks, strengthen your people processes, and help you think more strategically without the cost of that full-time strategy. And there's also the flexibility piece here. As a business grows, its HR needs aren't really static. Some months you might need only a little bit, and then suddenly you need a lot because you're recruiting or restructuring or handling a difficult employee issue, and you need that experience guidance quickly. So a good HR partner allows you to scale that support up and down depending on what's happening in your business. And then there's just the perspective that an external partner brings. When you're inside the business every day, you're so close to the people, the history, the politics, whereas external HR can bring a level of objectivity. They're not caught in the same emotional dynamics, which means that they can help leaders think more clearly, act more consistently, and avoid making decisions that feel right in the moment but create much bigger issues later. And that doesn't mean that internal HR is the wrong model. For some businesses, particularly as they get larger and more complex, having someone in-house is absolutely the right option. But for many growing businesses, outsourced HR is a more practical stepping stone because you get access to that capability and experience before you're ready to hire internally. So what happens when businesses don't have that support in place? Well, usually, what I see is not one big dramatic problem. It's often a smaller set of issues that just start to build. Your policies get outdated, which means suddenly you're being inconsistent. So managers handle similar situations in completely different ways. Feedback gets delayed. People aren't confident in having those conversations. Recruitment is rushed. Performance concerns are tolerated for just far too long. Someone raises a complaint, the response is awkward or it's unclear, and so the owner ends up carrying a lot of the people burden because no one else really knows how to deal with it. And slowly that starts to chip away at the culture. People notice inconsistency really quickly. They notice when one manager handles flexibility one way and another handles it a different way. They notice when poor behavior isn't addressed. They notice when expectations are unclear or decisions feel ad hoc. So even if leaders are well-intentioned, the absence of structure can create confusion, frustration, and a sense that things aren't fair. So from a business point of view, that has real consequences because it leads to higher turnover, slower growth, more time spent on avoidable issues, greater compliance risk. And it can also just drain a huge amount of energy from leaders who are already feeling stretched. And so instead of focusing on customers, growth, and strategy, they're spending hours trying to work out how to handle all these issues that they were never really equipped to manage. On the other hand, when a business has good HR support, the effect can be really powerful. You start to see more clarity, more consistency, more confidence across the business. Leaders know what's expected of them. Employees have a better experience because the processes feel fairer and more considered. Hiring's more deliberate. Onboarding improves. Difficult conversations happen earlier and with more skill. And culture becomes something that is actively shaped and really intentional rather than something that's just left to chance. So that is where a HR company can support growth of the business. And this is a point that's worth repeating a little bit because we often think about growth as increasing revenue or adding headcount. But if we want to be sustainable with growth, we've got to think about those people practices And how do they help us cut through the complexity of growing the business? Can we attract the right people? Can we keep them? Can we support our managers? Can we deal with issues before they escalate? Can we build a workplace that people want to be a part of? And if we can't answer those questions with an absolute yes, then that's where growth starts to feel harder than it should. So that's why HR, when it's done well, is not separate from business growth. It is one of the things that makes growth more stable and more achievable. So when should a business engage an HR company? Often earlier than they think. A lot of businesses wait till something has gone wrong and Googling isn't enough anymore, and they just really need to talk to someone. So, there's conflict or a bad hire, or a compliance issue, a manager out of their depth, an employee situation that's really stressful. And yes, HR support absolutely in those moments, but the best time to get support is often before all of that happens because there usually are signs. The owner or the leadership team is spending too much time dealing with people issues. Another is when hiring has become more regular, but there's really still no process around role design or interviews, onboarding, probation. Another sign is when compliance starts to feel a bit like guesswork. We had those templates that we had from that other company about 5 years ago, or, a lawyer friend gave me those things a couple of years ago. And, different managers are kind of doing their own version of people management. So things are becoming inconsistent. Sometimes it's just the stage of the business. The team has grown, there are more layers. What was informally doesn't work as well anymore. That point is really different for every business. But once things are becoming a recurring distraction, that's usually a strong indicator that HR support will help. And finally, the right HR partner does matter. So not every HR company is going to be the right fit for every business. What matters is finding support that is practical, commercially aware, and tailored to the reality of your business. So you want someone who understands growth, knows how to balance compliance with pragmatism, and who can give you advice that's not just technically correct, but is actually useful. Because the best HR support should make things feel clearer and not more complicated. So it should help you to feel confident as a leader and not overwhelmed with lots of fair work jargon. And it should support the kind of workplace that you're trying to build rather than, here are some generic templates and you get to work it out. So if you've ever found yourself wondering what an HR company actually does, then the simplest answer is that it helps you create the people foundations your business needs to grow well. So that includes compliance, contracts, policies, performance management, workplace issues, and recruitment. But beyond that, it's about helping your leaders to lead better, helping teams work in a more consistent and supported environment, and helping businesses avoid the kind of people problems that could quietly hold them back. And if you're at the point where the people side is starting to feel heavier, messier, more distracting than it used to, then that's a sign that maybe it's time to stop figuring it out all on your own. And if you'd like to chat with us more at Amplify HR about how we can help, there's a link to book in a time for a free discovery call in the show description. And if you've received value from this episode, I would love it if you could leave a rating or a review or Apple Podcasts or Spotify so someone else can also find the episodes to help with their business. Episodes are released on Mondays, so click subscribe and you'll be notified of when that's available. Thank you so much for joining me. If you have any feedback, questions, or ideas for future episodes, head on over to amplifyhr.com.au or connect with me on LinkedIn and we can start a conversation.